The rain fell steadily, washing the streets of the small town where 17-year-old Emily had spent her entire life in foster care. She was used to being invisible, overlooked, a shadow in a world that seemed to forget her existence. The other kids at school teased her, calling her useless, a nobody with no family, no future. They didn't understand. They didn't know what it was like to be abandoned, to feel like you didn't belong anywhere. But Emily was okay with it. She had learned to keep her head down, to avoid the stares, the whispers. She didn't need anyone. All she wanted was to make it to her 18th birthday, when she'd finally be free to leave the foster care system and figure out how to survive on her own. But that night, on the eve of her birthday, everything changed. Emily never expected that a simple knock on her door would shatter the fragile world she had carefully built. She opened it to find a man standing there, dressed in a sharp black suit, his face unreadable. "Emily Jackson?" he asked, his voice calm yet unsettling. She nodded, confused. "Yes, that's me, who are you?" The man didn't answer right away. He looked over his shoulder, as if checking for something, before stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "I'm here because it's time you knew the truth," he said, his gaze locking onto hers with an intensity that sent a chill down her spine. Emily instinctively took a step back. "What are you talking about?" The man didn't seem to notice her unease. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small folder, its contents a mystery to her. "Your parents weren't just ordinary people, Emily. They were brilliant innovators, tech moguls who secretly built a vast empire. An empire that now powers the surveillance system used by the FBI to track and monitor criminals all over the country." Emily's mind raced, struggling to process what the man was saying. "What do you mean, powers the surveillance system? What does this have to do with me?" "Everything," the man replied softly, a hint of regret in his voice. "You're the heir to that empire. Your parents left everything to you. And now they're gone." "Gone?" Emily repeated, her voice trembling. She couldn't grasp what he was telling her. Her parents, she had never known them. They had died when she was just a baby. Raised by strangers in the foster system, she had never known love, never known what it meant to have a real family. "Your parents were assassinated," the man continued, his words heavy with the weight of a secret too dangerous to carry. "The people who killed them are still out there, and they'll stop at nothing to finish what they started." Emily's heart pounded in her chest. She had always felt there was something more to her story, something hidden in the darkness of her past. But she never could have imagined this. "What does this all mean?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The man's eyes softened, but there was no time for comfort. "It means you're in control of the system the FBI uses to track every criminal in the country. You have access to information that could change the course of history, information that can bring down anyone, anywhere. But someone inside the government is working against you. They want you dead, Emily. They want to take back what your parents left behind." She stared at him, struggling to process everything he had just said. She was a nobody. How could she possibly be the heir to a tech empire? How could she control something as powerful as the surveillance system that ran the country? But the man's expression didn't waver. "It's all true. And now, you're the only one who can stop them." A million questions flooded her mind, but before she could ask another one, the man turned and motioned for her to follow. "You need to come with me. There's no time to waste." Emily hesitated. Everything about this felt like a dream. Or rather, a nightmare. Who was this man? Why had he chosen her? And why now? She had spent her life trying to survive, to stay out of trouble, to keep her head down. She wasn't ready for any of this. She didn't even know how to begin to understand it. But there was something in the man's eyes, something urgent, that made her follow him. The rain pounded harder against the pavement as they stepped outside. She could feel the weight of the world shifting beneath her feet. She had no idea what she was about to walk into, but she couldn't deny the strange pull that kept her moving forward. As they reached a sleek black car parked in front of her foster home, the man handed her a phone. "This is your key to everything. The system, it's yours. Use it wisely. But be careful. The people hunting you, they're already looking for you. You won't be safe until they're taken down." Emily's fingers brushed against the phone screen, and for the first time in her life, she felt a flicker of something she had never known before: power. But with that power came an overwhelming sense of fear. Who could she trust? How could she possibly fight back against an enemy she couldn't even see? And then, as if to confirm her worst fears, a distant sound echoed through the night. A low hum. Like the growl of a predator. "They're already here," the man said urgently, grabbing her arm. "Get in the car." Emily's heart raced as she slid into the back seat. The car sped off into the night, the streets disappearing behind them. As she sat in the silence, the weight of what she had just learned began to settle in. She was the heir to a tech empire. She controlled the very system the FBI used to track criminals. And someone inside the government wanted her gone. But who? And why? As the car sped through the rain, Emily had no idea where she was headed. Only one thing was certain: her life was never going to be the same again. And the storm was just beginning. The question now was, could she survive it? The car continued to speed through the wet streets, its headlights slicing through the dark like a beacon in the night. Emily's mind raced, her heart thumping in her chest as she tried to wrap her head around the insanity of everything the man had told her. Tech empire. Surveillance system. Assassins. FBI. It felt like a movie, something that only happened to other people. Ordinary people like her didn't get caught up in things like this. She glanced over at the man sitting across from her. He was calm, his expression unreadable as he tapped something into the phone he had given her. He didn't seem the least bit worried, even though they were clearly being hunted. That fact alone made her stomach tighten in fear. She wanted to ask more questions. So many questions, but the words got stuck in her throat. It was as if her entire life had just been flipped upside down, and she didn't know how to make sense of it. After a few moments of silence, the man finally spoke. "My name is Agent Harris," he said, his voice steady, but with an edge that made Emily feel like she was talking to someone who knew far more than he was letting on. "I work for an agency that monitors national security threats. Your parents were at the heart of a project that, well, it's bigger than anyone could have ever imagined." He leaned back in his seat, folding his arms across his chest, and glanced at her. "Before your parents died, they were responsible for creating the most advanced AI system the government had ever seen. This system, known as SYNTH, was designed to predict and monitor criminal activity, to intercept potential threats before they could escalate. It's the most powerful tool in the government's arsenal, and your family created it." Emily's mind was spinning. She tried to focus on his words, but it was like trying to piece together a puzzle with missing pieces. Her parents. They had never been real to her, just names on a birth certificate. The idea that they had been powerful, that they had created something so influential, felt surreal. "The system doesn't just track criminals," Agent Harris continued. "It monitors communications, financial transactions, social media, anything that could indicate criminal intent. It was built to protect the country, to prevent disasters before they happen. But it's also powerful enough to bring down entire governments if someone with the right knowledge wanted to use it for their own gain." He paused for a moment, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied her. "And that's where you come in, Emily." She swallowed hard, her throat dry. "I don't understand. Why me? Why wasn't I told about any of this before?" "You were hidden," he replied simply. "Your parents knew what they were doing when they built SYNTH. They knew the risks. And when they were killed, they made sure you were protected, kept away from the people who would stop at nothing to get their hands on the system. They placed you in the foster care system so you could grow up without knowing the truth. So they could keep you safe." The weight of his words sank in, and Emily felt a strange sense of betrayal. All these years, she had lived like a nobody. She had no idea that her life, her very existence, was tied to something so monumental. She was the key to a hidden empire, and she hadn't even known it. But why now, she asked. Why come for me now, on my birthday? If they wanted to protect me, why didn't they do more? Harris's jaw tightened. Because they didn't expect the people hunting you to be so relentless. The people who killed your parents aren't just after the technology, they want you. They want the control you have over SYNTH. They believe you're weak. They think you're just a scared orphan with no power, but they're wrong. They don't know what you're capable of. Her fingers tightened around the phone in her lap. It felt like a lifeline, but also like a heavy burden. The idea that she had the power to control something that powerful, something that could track and destroy people, terrified her. She didn't want that kind of power. She didn't want to be a target. She just wanted to disappear into a quiet life, far away from this madness. I don't want this, Emily whispered, almost to herself. You don't have a choice, Harris replied softly. It's already inside you. You control the system. It's in the phone. It's in your blood. All we can do now is make sure you learn how to use it before they find us. Emily's breath caught in her throat. What did he mean by in your blood? Was she supposed to know how to control the system somehow? Was she supposed to be some kind of tech genius, like her parents? She had no training, no experience. She was just a teenager, struggling to get by. How could she possibly be expected to stop these people? Who's after me? She asked, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to remain calm. Harris hesitated for a moment before speaking. There's a man within the government who is orchestrating this. He's the one who wants you gone. His name is Director Miller. He's been using the system for his own gain, bypassing all the safeguards your parents put in place. He's using SYNTH to manipulate people, control outcomes, even eliminate threats. But he didn't count on you, Emily. You're the one person who can stop him. The thought of Director Miller, the man responsible for her parents' deaths, the man who wanted her out of the way, sent a chill down her spine. But what could she possibly do? She didn't even know how to use the system, let alone how to fight someone like that. As the car sped down the highway, the rain still pouring heavily outside, Emily felt the weight of the world settling on her shoulders. Everything she thought she knew was a lie. Her life had been a carefully constructed illusion, and now she was caught in a dangerous game with no way out. You're going to have to trust me, Harris said, breaking the silence. We don't have time to explain everything, but we'll get you trained. We'll help you understand how to use SYNTH. But you need to stay ahead of them. They're already on to you. Emily stared out the window, her mind racing. She didn't know who she could trust anymore. She didn't know if she could trust Harris. And she definitely didn't know how to survive against the powerful forces closing in on her. But one thing was clear, her life was never going to be the same. And the game had only just begun. The night stretched on as the car cut through the darkness, the rain still pouring relentlessly. Emily's mind churned with questions, but every time she opened her mouth to speak, the words felt too heavy, too fragile to escape her lips. She was trying to grasp onto something, anything, that could make sense of her life in the chaos that had suddenly unfolded. But the more she thought about it, the more it all seemed like a bad dream. The car slowed down as they approached a nondescript building, an old, worn-down warehouse tucked away on the outskirts of town. Emily could see the outline of a few figures standing at the entrance, silhouetted against the dim street lights. She didn't know who they were, but Harris didn't hesitate. He stepped out of the car first, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable. Emily followed hesitantly, her heart pounding with each step. They were ushered inside quickly. The place was dark, save for a few low lights casting eerie shadows on the cracked concrete walls. It smelled of dust, metal, and something faintly chemical, like the remnants of old machines that had long outlived their purpose. Emily felt an odd sense of disorientation, like she had crossed into another world. She had been on the outside, a nobody, and now she was stepping into a place that smelled like danger, secrecy, and hidden truths. "Welcome to the safe house," Harris said, his voice almost too calm. "This is where we can keep you hidden while we figure out our next move." Emily glanced around, her eyes catching on the few figures in the room. They were all men and women, dressed in tactical gear, their faces hard and guarded. None of them looked like the kind of people who would have any answers for her. They were soldiers, not friends. They were here to protect, but who would protect her from them? Harris motioned for her to sit down at a table in the center of the room. There was a screen set up on the wall behind it, showing a series of blurry, fast-moving images, like surveillance footage being fed into a live stream. "We've been tracking Director Miller's movements," Harris said as he sat down across from her. "He's powerful, but he's also very careful. We don't have much on him yet, but we know one thing for sure, he's already mobilized his team. They're coming for you, Emily. And they won't stop until they find you." Emily's breath caught in her throat. It was hard to process that someone, somewhere, was already planning her death. The people who had killed her parents were still out there, and now they wanted her. And for what? A tech system that she didn't even know how to use? "Why me?" she whispered. "Why not someone else? There must be 1,000 people who could control this system better than I could. Why do I matter?" Harris's eyes softened for a brief moment before he answered. "Because your parents built it with you in mind, Emily. They made sure that you would be the one to have control over SYNTH when the time came. They knew you would be the only one who could stop it from falling into the wrong hands." Emily closed her eyes, trying to push away the confusion and fear that seemed to swirl around her like a storm she couldn't escape. She had spent her whole life believing she was nothing, that her existence was an accident, a mere coincidence. But now she was supposed to be someone who held the fate of the entire country in her hands. She didn't know the first thing about how to control the system, let alone how to fight against an invisible enemy. Meanwhile, in the shadows of the room, a man watched her with sharp eyes, his fingers drumming on the table in a nervous, restless rhythm. He was older than Harris, with a weathered face and a scar running down his cheek. Emily didn't know who he was, but there was something in his gaze that made her uneasy. His voice broke the silence. "We need to act fast," he said, his tone urgent. "We can't wait around. Miller's people will track you down. If we don't take him out before he realizes we're onto him, this whole operation could be compromised." Harris's expression didn't change, but his posture stiffened. "We'll move when we're ready, Alex. No one makes a move without the proper intel." Alex's eyes flashed with frustration. "We don't have time for intel. We know Miller's after her. He's already got eyes on this place. The longer we wait, the more dangerous it gets." Emily felt a cold wave of fear wash over her. She had never been a part of something this intense, this dangerous. People were fighting over her. They were fighting over something she didn't even understand, something that had been kept from her for 18 years. The room fell silent again, and Emily's mind began to race with more questions. How was she supposed to stop Miller if she couldn't even comprehend the power she supposedly held? The phone in her pocket felt like an anchor, weighing her down. What was she supposed to do with it? Was it really as powerful as Harris had said? Could it really stop someone like Director Miller? But just as she was about to ask another question, the lights in the room flickered, and the hum of a distant engine reached her ears. It was faint at first, but then it grew louder, closer. The sound of a vehicle, multiple vehicles, perhaps, approaching quickly. Harris's eyes narrowed, and he stood up abruptly, motioning for everyone to be quiet. His hand went to his earpiece, and he whispered something to someone on the other end. His eyes flicked to Emily, and in that moment, she understood. The people after her weren't just some faceless government agents. They were ruthless. They were close. And they were prepared to do whatever it took to get to her. Alex moved quickly to the far side of the room, checking a series of monitors mounted on the wall. Emily could see the tension in his face. He was scanning the footage, his fingers moving rapidly across the keyboard. The dim glow of the screens cast a pale light on his features, highlighting the lines of stress etched into his face. "They're here," he muttered, his voice low. "They've found us." Harris turned to Emily, his expression hardening. "Get ready. We're not safe here anymore." The pounding of footsteps echoed from outside the warehouse, growing louder. The hum of the vehicle stopped, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Emily could hear the distant crackle of radio static. The enemy was closing in, and there was no way out, not unless she did something she still didn't understand. Her pulse raced. She was stuck in the middle of something so far beyond her that it made her feel small, insignificant. But she wasn't a child anymore. She had to make a choice. The moment was coming. The storm was here. And Emily realized with a sickening twist in her stomach that the only way out might be to face the very thing that terrified her the most. The air in the room was thick with tension, and Emily's pulse thudded in her ears as she tried to steady herself. The sound of approaching footsteps had shifted from distant echoes to a rapid crescendo. Someone was coming. She felt the cold sweat bead at her temples, her hands clammy as she gripped the edge of the table. The harsh clicking of keys echoed across the room as Alex continued to scan the monitors, his face drawn tight with concentration. "They're moving fast," he muttered, eyes flickering to Harris. "We don't have much time." Harris didn't respond immediately. His gaze was fixed on Emily, a look in his eyes that she couldn't quite read. It was a mixture of concern and resolve, as if he knew something she didn't. Something about the way he looked at her made her feel both exposed and protected at the same time. The vehicles outside had stopped. No engines revved. No tires screeched. Just dead silence. But that silence felt worse than anything. The calm before the storm, Emily thought, her breath shallow. She felt the weight of the phone in her pocket again. Her fingers itched to pull it out and check it, but what would it do? The device that was supposed to make her the most powerful person in the room, the one thing everyone seemed to think was her salvation, felt more like a ticking time bomb. What if she couldn't control it? What if it ended up being the thing that led them straight to her grave? "We need to move, Emily," Harris's voice snapped her out of her spiraling thoughts. "They'll be here any second." She nodded but felt rooted to the spot. Her mind was clouded with too many questions, too many fears. She couldn't let herself get caught up in the panic. But how could she not? They were coming for her. The very people who had killed her parents were coming for her, and she was supposed to stop them with a system she didn't even understand. She wasn't a hero. She wasn't special. She was just a frightened orphan with no idea what to do. Alex stepped forward, his face hardening as he turned to Harris. "The perimeter's compromised. We're not getting out through the front. They're too close." Harris's jaw tightened. "Then we go through the tunnels. We've got a safe house 30 miles out. We can lose them there." Emily's eyes widened. "Tunnels? What are you talking about?" "There's an underground network, one that was set up by your parents. It's a failsafe, a way to move without being detected. They didn't just build SYNTH, Emily. They built an entire system of hidden escape routes, places no one can trace." Emily stared at him in disbelief. She had no idea any of this existed, no idea that the people who had raised her had been involved in something so monumental, so dangerous. It felt like the walls were closing in on her. She had no control. No knowledge. She was a pawn in a game she didn't understand, and the people who were supposed to protect her were about to risk everything to keep her alive. Before she could ask another question, Alex's voice broke through the tension again. "They're here. We need to move now." The sound of heavy boots outside the door brought the fear to a fever pitch. Emily could feel her heart racing, her breath quickening as the footsteps neared. She looked to Harris, who was already grabbing her arm, pulling her toward the back of the warehouse. "Trust me," he said, his voice low but insistent. "We'll get you out of here. You have to stay focused." As they moved through the dimly lit hallway at the back of the building, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The air in the tunnels felt thick and oppressive, as if the very walls were watching her. It was so quiet, too quiet. The sound of their footsteps seemed to echo unnaturally, bouncing off the stone walls, amplifying her fear. "Where are we going?" Emily whispered, trying to keep her voice steady. Harris didn't answer immediately, his eyes scanning the dark passages ahead. His pace didn't slow, but his grip on her arm tightened. "We're going to the control center. It's where your parents worked. If we can get to the system there, we'll have a chance." Emily swallowed hard. The control center? Was that where the answers were? Where she could figure out how to stop Director Miller? Her mind was whirling, but she couldn't stop herself from asking. "How do you know we'll be safe there?" Harris's eyes flicked back to her, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of uncertainty. It was brief, almost imperceptible, but it was there. And it made her heart skip a beat. "We don't," he said softly, his voice more fragile than she had ever heard it. "But it's the only chance we've got." They rounded another corner, and Emily could hear a distant, mechanical hum, something that sounded like a generator, the heartbeat of the underground system. The hum grew louder as they moved deeper into the tunnels, and just when Emily thought she might lose her mind from the silence, Harris stopped abruptly. "Get down," he hissed, pulling her toward a narrow alcove in the wall. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she ducked into the shadows beside him. From around the corner came a group of heavily armed men, their boots echoing through the tunnels like a death march. Emily held her breath, praying they wouldn't see her, praying that she would stay hidden in the darkness. She could hear their voices now, muffled but urgent. "They've got to be here somewhere," one of the men growled. "Search every inch of these tunnels. Miller wants her alive. He doesn't care how much damage we have to do to get to her." Another man responded, his voice colder, harder. "Alive, yeah, but don't get attached. If she's not going to talk, we're taking her out." Emily's stomach lurched. They were talking about her like she wasn't even a person. To them, she was just a target, a piece of leverage to be used and discarded. But what terrified her more than their threats was the possibility that she wouldn't survive this. They weren't going to stop, not until they had what they wanted. Harris's hand was still firmly on her arm, but even though he was trying to keep her still, Emily could feel his body tense, his muscles coiled with the kind of readiness that came from years of training. For a moment, the men's footsteps stopped directly outside their alcove. Emily's heart skipped a beat. They were so close. Too close. She felt the cold bite of fear sink deeper into her chest. This was it. The point of no return. The next few moments would determine whether she survived or fell into the hands of the people who had already taken everything from her. And still, the most terrifying thought of all gripped her: she had no idea how to stop them. The footsteps outside the alcove grew louder, then paused. Emily's heart pounded in her chest, every muscle frozen in place. She could barely breathe, the tension so thick it felt like a physical weight pressing against her chest. Harris was still beside her, his grip tight on her arm, his body tense. He was listening too, every sense on high alert. For a moment, it seemed like time itself had stopped. Then, a voice, deep, cold, cut through the silence. "They're not here," the man said, his tone sharp. "We've lost the trail. Move back to the surface. The extraction team is waiting." Emily held her breath, straining to hear the response. Was it a trick? A double cross? But then, to her surprise, the footsteps started to fade, growing distant as the men turned and retreated, heading back down the tunnel from where they came. Harris didn't move, not even an inch, until the sound of their boots was completely gone. Emily could barely believe it, her body still trembling with the adrenaline of the near encounter. She looked up at Harris, his face etched with concentration. "They'll be back," Harris said quietly. "This isn't over. We need to move faster." Emily nodded, though her mind was still racing. How had they known to leave so suddenly? She had no idea, but it felt too easy, too convenient. She wanted to trust Harris, but a nagging doubt lingered in the back of her mind. Could she really rely on him? Or had he been playing her all along? Before she could ask, Harris led her down the narrow, winding passageway toward the heart of the underground network. The walls grew colder, the air thinner. Emily's thoughts were a tangled mess. Her parents had been part of this hidden world, creating something that now seemed more like a weapon than a tool. But how much did she actually know? Had they planned for all of this? Or had she simply been kept in the dark for her own protection? As they rounded another corner, the tunnel opened up into a large, dimly lit chamber. There, in the center, stood a tall, dark figure, his back to them. Emily's breath hitched, her body instinctively pulling back. "Who's that?" she whispered, trying to keep her voice steady. Harris's eyes narrowed. "Stay close. Don't trust anyone down here." Emily didn't argue, but the figure's presence was unnerving. He was too still, too quiet. The man turned slowly, revealing a face she didn't recognize, sharp features, eyes that gleamed with an unsettling intelligence. But what struck her most was the calmness in his expression, the way he looked at her as though he'd been expecting her. "You're Emily," he said softly, his voice smooth and unsettlingly familiar. "I've been waiting for you." Harris stiffened, stepping forward. "What are you doing here, Daniel?" Daniel's smile was almost too smooth, as though he were in complete control of the situation. "I'm here to make sure Emily understands everything. She deserves to know the truth, don't you think?" Emily felt her stomach twist. "What truth?" Daniel stepped closer, his eyes locking onto hers. "The truth about your parents, about Synth, and about why you're really here." He paused, watching her closely. "You think they hid you to protect you, don't you? That they kept you away from the world so you could grow up like a normal girl. But that's not why they hid you, Emily. They didn't hide you to protect you from assassins." He took another step closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "They hid you to protect the world from you." The words hit Emily like a punch to the gut. Her knees buckled, and she gripped the wall to steady herself. "What do you mean? What are you saying?" Daniel's smile didn't falter, but there was something in his eyes now, a glint of something darker, more dangerous. Synth wasn't just created for surveillance. It wasn't just for the FBI. It was created to control the world's power, to become the tool of control for whoever held the keys. And you, Emily, you're the one who can unlock it. Harris stepped forward, his voice sharp with warning. "This is a mistake. Don't listen to him, Emily. He's trying to manipulate you." But Daniel didn't even flinch. He kept his eyes locked on Emily's, unblinking, as though he was waiting for her to make her own choice. "Your parents didn't just want to protect you," Daniel continued. "They wanted to use you, to make you the most powerful person in the world. They knew you were the only one who could access Synth's full potential. They knew that if you were ever found, you would control everything, the power to see, to know, to manipulate anything and anyone." Emily's mind was reeling. This was too much. She had been told that her parents were good people, that they had hidden her to keep her safe from the people who had killed them. But this was something else entirely. Had her parents truly built this monstrous system with the intention of giving it all to her? Had they wanted her to wield the power of surveillance, to become the puppet master of the world? "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "That can't be true." "It's the truth," Daniel pressed. "And now that you're of age, it's time for you to take your rightful place." But first, he glanced at Harris, a small, almost imperceptible nod passing between them. "First, we need to deal with the people who want to stop you." Before Emily could react, a series of loud crashes echoed from the far side of the chamber. The sound of heavy doors being kicked open. Harris moved into a defensive stance, pulling Emily back against the wall, away from the entrance. "Get ready," he hissed, his voice urgent. "They've found us again. It's not just Miller this time." Someone else is pulling the strings. Emily's pulse raced. The walls seemed to close in around her as the tension in the room skyrocketed. She had no idea who was on the other side of that door, but she could feel the danger closing in fast. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about deciding who she could trust, who she should fight for, and who would ultimately control the fate of everyone she had ever known. The footsteps were now louder than ever, and with them, a deep, unsettling truth started to dawn on her. The conflict she thought she understood was far bigger than anything she could have imagined. They were after her, not just for what she knew, but for what she was. And in that moment, Emily realized, whether she liked it or not, she was the most dangerous person in the room. The sound of pounding boots grew deafening, and Emily felt the walls vibrate under the weight of approaching danger. Harris's eyes were wild with urgency, his hand gripping hers tightly as he pushed her further into the shadows. The door to the chamber they were in had barely cracked open when a series of gunshots rang out. The first volley echoed, the deafening crack splitting the silence, then another. Men in dark uniforms, armed to the teeth, stormed through the doorway, their eyes scanning for any sign of movement. Emily's heart hammered in her chest as she pressed herself against the cold stone, barely daring to breathe. She could see the flash of weapons, the intensity in their faces, but none of them seemed to notice her or Harris. They were all focused on the tall figure standing near the center of the room. "Daniel. You think you can hide her from me, Harris?" Daniel's voice was sharp, almost mocking as he stepped into the open. "This is your last warning. Step aside." Harris stood still, his body tense as he gritted his teeth. "You don't understand, Daniel. You're playing with something you don't control." Daniel smirked, as though he'd heard the same words 100 times before. "Oh, I understand more than you think. I just didn't realize how easy it would be to take back what was always mine." Emily's mind raced. This wasn't about survival anymore. This was a power struggle, one where she was the prize. They all wanted her for the control she could wield over Synth, but they hadn't realized the most dangerous thing about her wasn't just the system. It was her. Her fingers trembled as they hovered near the phone in her pocket. The device her parents had left her, the key to Synth, the key to everything. The AI that could spy on every criminal, track every move, predict every action, it was all within her grasp, and yet, she still had no idea how to control it. It was a weapon, but one she had no training to use. And that's when it hit her. She didn't need to control it. She just needed to access it. All of it. The system, the data, the power, she had been given the ability to see it all, to make her own choices about what to do with it. Before she could think it through, the decision came to her in a flash. The gunshots, the chaos, everything that had led to this moment, it all came down to one thing: she had to fight back. She had to fight for herself. With a sudden movement, Emily pulled out the phone. Harris saw her action and turned to her, eyes wide. "Emily, no," but it was too late. She pressed the power button. At first, nothing happened. Her breath hitched in her throat. But then, the screen flashed, the words "System Online" appearing in bold letters across the screen. A low hum began, rising steadily as the AI began to wake. Daniel's eyes snapped to her, his smug expression faltering for the briefest moment. "No, you don't understand," but his words were cut off by the sound of the air conditioning system in the room suddenly whirring to life. Lights flickered, then stabilized, as though something had been activated, something far more powerful than they had anticipated. Before anyone could react, the system began to override the room's security protocols. The doors that had been bolted shut now opened wide. The armed men froze, their weapons raised, but the command came too late. Emily didn't understand how, but she felt the power of Synth surge through her, a tidal wave of information flooding her mind. She saw everything, every face, every place, every camera, every movement. The data was all laid bare before her, and for the first time, she felt like she was in control. She stood tall, the weight of the phone still in her hand. "Stop." "Everyone, stop," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. Her command didn't come from authority, it came from something much more primal. Something that resonated with the power of SYNTH itself. For a brief moment, time seemed to hang suspended. The soldiers hesitated, unsure of what to do. The flickering of lights intensified, and the entire system hummed louder as though it were a living thing, responding to Emily's will. Daniel's face twisted with disbelief, anger, and fear. "What have you done?" "I've taken control," Emily replied, her voice steady, but the weight of the situation pressing down on her. "And I'm not giving it back." But just as it seemed like Emily might finally have the upper hand, a soft, mocking laugh echoed from the far side of the room. The sound sent a shiver down Emily's spine. She turned to face the source, but it wasn't Harris or Daniel, it was someone far more unexpected. A tall, sharply dressed man stepped forward, his eyes glinting with the confidence of someone who had never known defeat. "I knew you'd figure it out, Emily. You're just like your parents," he said, his smile thin and dangerous. Harris's face drained of color as the man stepped into the light, revealing himself to be none other than Director Miller, the very man who had orchestrated the attacks on Emily's life. The man who had killed her parents. "No," Harris whispered, a look of shock and horror crossing his face. Director Miller continued to smile, unfazed by the chaos around him. "I should have known better than to think I could control SYNTH. Your parents always knew it was too much for anyone to own. They wanted to safeguard it, but they were wrong. It's too valuable, too powerful. And now it's yours. You're the key, Emily. You're the future." Emily's stomach twisted, the realization sinking in like a cold blade. All this time, Miller had been pulling strings from the shadows, manipulating everyone, including her. He wasn't just after the AI, he was after her. The true power was in her blood. But there was something Miller hadn't counted on. Emily wasn't going to let anyone control her anymore. The flood of information from SYNTH surged inside her again, more powerful than ever. It wasn't just data anymore, it was knowledge, a force she could bend to her will. "You can't have it, Miller," Emily said, her voice growing more confident. "It's mine." Before anyone could stop her, she gave a single command, one that would change everything. She cut off Miller's access to SYNTH, locking him out of the system permanently. His expression twisted in fury, but there was nothing he could do. The AI was no longer his tool. It was hers. The entire room seemed to pulse with energy as the system finally came to a halt. The chaos that had filled the space moments before was replaced by a deafening silence. The lights flickered and then steadied, and for the first time, Emily felt like she wasn't just a pawn. She wasn't the victim anymore. She was the one in control. But as the dust settled, and Emily stood there, still gripping the phone, she realized something she hadn't expected. The very power she had just claimed felt both liberating and suffocating. She wasn't just a girl anymore. She was the future of an empire, one she could never escape. And as the room filled with the wreckage of a battle fought with technology and blood, Emily knew that this was only the beginning. The war for power was far from over. Emily stood in the center of the chamber, the cold weight of the phone in her hand, her mind still buzzing with the aftershock of what had just happened. SYNTH had been activated, the AI that had once seemed like a distant, ominous force was now a part of her. For a moment, she wondered if she was truly in control or if the system was controlling her. But as the dust settled, she realized that, at least for now, she had made the decision. She had chosen to take ownership of her destiny, and in doing so, she had opened the door to an entirely new world, a world where she could no longer just be the orphan, the pawn. She was the one pulling the strings now. The silence that had enveloped the room was deafening. Harris stood a few steps away, his eyes still wide with a mixture of awe and fear. The armed men who had once surrounded them had either fled or been taken into custody by the system. The flicker of the lights, the strange hum of SYNTH. It all seemed to fade into the background as Emily focused on the man who had once seemed untouchable, Director Miller. His anger was palpable, his eyes narrowing as he realized just how much power he had lost. "You think you've won?" he spat, his voice low but brimming with venom. "This isn't over, Emily. You have no idea what you've unleashed." Emily stepped forward, her heart steady, the weight of the phone not as heavy in her hand as it had been before. "I know exactly what I've unleashed, Miller," she said, her voice calm but firm. "But this time it's my choice. Not yours. And I'm not letting you take control again." Miller's lips twisted into a sneer, but there was no fight left in him. He could see that she wasn't afraid anymore. He had underestimated her, just like everyone else. What had once been a system meant to manipulate and control was now her tool to wield, and no one, not even him, could take that from her. With a final, bitter glance, Miller turned away, retreating into the shadows. He was defeated, for now, but Emily knew this wasn't the end. There were more like him, more powerful people who would try to use her, to manipulate her. But she was ready. She had the power to fight back, to choose who she could trust and who she would fight against. Harris, still by her side, finally spoke, his voice quiet but filled with respect. "You did it, Emily. You took back what was rightfully yours." She met his gaze, her mind still processing everything that had happened. "But did I, Harris? Or did I just become part of the same game my parents started?" She shook her head, the question swirling inside her. The system, SYNTH, was in her hands, but what did that mean for the future? For her? Was she any different from the people who had tried to use her all along? Harris hesitated, then stepped closer, his eyes full of understanding. "You're not them, Emily. You're choosing your own path now. You get to decide what happens next. And that's something they never had the chance to do." The weight of his words hit her hard. He was right. Her parents had built SYNTH, not just to surveil and control, but as a means to shape the future. They had wanted to protect her, to hide her away, but it was she who would decide how this technology would be used. She wasn't a pawn. She was the queen. But as she looked around the chamber, the reality of what she had just taken on began to settle in. The system was powerful, but it was also dangerous. She had seen the way it could be twisted, the way it could turn on people. She had been protected all these years, but now the true responsibility rested on her shoulders. A sense of clarity began to form in her mind. She knew what she had to do. There were people out there who needed to be held accountable. There were criminals, corrupt officials, and organizations that had been using the system for their own gain. Emily didn't need to play their game. She could change it. She could take back the power and use it for something better. "I'm not going to let this become another weapon," Emily said, her voice more certain than it had ever been. "I'm going to make sure it's used to protect people. To stop those who would abuse it." Harris nodded, his expression softening. "I know you will. You're not the same girl you were before. You've become something else. Something stronger." Emily couldn't help but smile faintly. The journey she had been on had changed her in ways she never imagined. She had gone from an orphan, bullied and overlooked, to the heir of an empire, controlling the most powerful surveillance system ever created. But the power was no longer what mattered. It was the choice, her choice, that had given her a sense of freedom, of purpose. As she turned to leave the chamber, the light of a new day breaking through the windows above, Emily realized that she was standing at the edge of something bigger than herself. The future wasn't written yet. There was so much work to be done. The world needed a guardian, someone to make sure the power of SYNTH was used to protect and not harm. Emily was that guardian. And with that thought, she stepped forward into the unknown, ready to face whatever came next, knowing that this was only the beginning of a new chapter in her life, one where she would never be controlled again.